What if the reason your wealth hasn't fully arrived isn't because of the economy, your work ethic, or some missing opportunity, but because your home hasn't yet learned how to hold it? I don't mean that in a metaphorical or mystical sense. I mean it as a real practical possibility. What if right now the energy of your home is unintentionally leaking the very abundance you've been working so hard to create? There's a quiet truth in feng shui that most people overlook. Your home is not just where you live, it's where your energy settles, where your karma gathers, and where your future either takes root or slowly withers. And nowhere is this more evident than in a specific corner of your living space, a space the ancients identified not through superstition, but through observation. They called it the wealth corner, not because gold magically appears there, but because when this space is aligned, softened, and respected, something shifts, not in the air, but in the outcomes. You start receiving what was already trying to find you. In my decades of studying feng shui and Buddhist teachings side by side, I've seen a pattern repeat too many times to ignore. People do all the right things, work harder, budget more carefully, make vision boards, pray, push, and still feel stuck. Still feel that no matter what they do, something is resisting, something invisible, something unspoken. But then, they shift one thing, they clean a corner, they move a heavy object, they place a small bowl, a plant, a symbol of what they wish to invite. And suddenly life answers, not like lightning, more like rainfall, quiet, consistent, undeniable. A promotion appears, a debt is cleared, a tension they didn't know they were carrying dissolves. Was it magic? No, it was alignment. Because abundance is not something you chase, it's something that ripens. But for ripening to happen, the ground has to be ready. The conditions have to match the intention. This is something Buddhist teachings have whispered for centuries. That prosperity is not a prize. It is a karmic consequence. It arrives when inner action and outer readiness mirror each other. You can't force a fruit to grow just because you're hungry, but you can tend the soil, you can water the roots, you can face the sun. So today in this video, I want to walk with you, not through theory, but through awareness, not through rigid compass points, but through practical, intuitive energy. We'll explore how to locate your home's wealth corner, not based on belief, but based on the logic of flow. We'll talk about what nourishes that space, what slowly depletes it, and how to treat it as you would treat a trusted friend, not with obsession, but with care. Because when you understand what this corner represents, not just on the floor plan, but in your life, you begin to realize that prosperity was never far away. It was simply waiting for a place to land. But before we go deeper, I'd like to ask for a moment of your support. If this kind of content speaks to you, if you value quiet wisdom, grounded teachings, and practical insights you can apply right away, I invite you to gently tap that like button, share this with someone who might need it, and subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. We're almost at our first 1,000 followers, and your presence helps me continue sharing deeper, more nourishing content with a wider community. This channel was never about going viral, it's about going inward. And if you're still here, I trust that's something you value too. So take a breath. Look around the space you're sitting in right now. Notice how it feels, not just what's in it, but what it reflects back to you. Ask yourself, without rushing, does this home support my future? Or is it still echoing parts of my past? Because in the end, your wealth is not out there. It's waiting for you to prepare a space within and around you. And sometimes the shift begins not with a new job, not with a new habit, but with a single corner of your home finally being seen. Let's begin. 1. 5 energetic corners that influence financial say the corner of circulation where flow builds fortune. When we talk about wealth in feng shui, we're not talking about numbers. We're talking about movement, intelligent, intentional, life-giving movement. Because energy that doesn't move hardens. Water that doesn't flow stagnates. And money, whether it's in the form of ideas, value, resources, or currency, follows the same law. It either circulates, nourishing everything it touches, or it pools in the wrong places, attracting dust, tension, and decay. The wealth corner, when understood properly, isn't just about storage, it's about circulation. And that begins with learning how to design a space that encourages flow not only through open pathways or minimalist design, but through subtle, energetic reminders that movement is both welcome and safe. In traditional feng shui, the element of water is deeply connected to wealth, not because it brings money, but because it mirrors its behavior. Water is soft but powerful. It moves around obstacles without resistance. It nourishes what it touches but disappears when not honored. A home that wants to receive prosperity must mirror water's essence. It must be able to flow without leaking, to be full without overflowing, and to be still without becoming stagnant. This is where circulation becomes the key, not just physical motion, but energetic coherence. Imagine a corner of your home, perhaps near the entrance, perhaps tucked beside a window, that feels blocked. Not because it's cluttered, but because nothing seems to happen there. It holds no story, it carries no attention. And perhaps unknowingly, you've allowed it to become a zone of energetic silence. In feng shui, these quiet corners become the slow leaks of fortune, not because of what's in them, but because of what's missing. Motion, attention, life. The solution is rarely dramatic. It's subtle. One small circular object, one gentle symbol of time, one flow-inducing form that signals to the space. Energy is allowed to move here. This is why one of the simplest adjustments you can make in the wealth corner is to introduce a rotating object, something that mimics the quiet spiraling of qi. A rotating hourglass, a small sculpture that spins lightly in the breeze, or even a decorative element with soft curves or spirals can begin to shift the stagnation of space into the momentum of life. Movement cues the subconscious. It tells the brain, and therefore the body, that change is happening, and that change is safe. In one home I visited in Kyoto, the couple placed a brass Tibetan prayer wheel, non-religious, simply decorative, on a wooden shelf in their east-facing corner. Though they didn't use it for chanting, they would turn it once each morning as they walked past. Nothing more. No intention setting, no incantation, just a simple turn. Within 3 months, the husband, a writer, received 2 unexpected commissions after months of silence. "It's strange," he said. "I didn't work harder. I just felt less stuck." The bowl is another powerful ally in this space, especially one that is round, metallic, or ceramic, and left partially open. Roundness is a sacred form in feng shui. It symbolizes completion without finality. A round bowl placed in a wealth corner, particularly near a source of light, begins to anchor flow. You're not filling it with gold, you're filling it with readiness. Some place a single coin in the center, others add water and flower petals, letting them float until they begin to wilt, then refreshing them. The point is not decoration. The point is interaction. You are telling the space, I am present here, I am watching this corner, I am willing to participate in its life. The placement of this circulation symbol matters. If placed in direct line with a window, it invites external light and qi inward. If near a door, it can slow the too fast rush of energy outward. If placed low, it grounds. If placed at eye level, it teaches. In a Melbourne home, a designer named Amelia once added a mirrored bowl, nothing expensive, near the southern window of her studio. She didn't use it for offerings or display. She simply placed it beside her drawing desk, where it reflected sunlight in the morning and the overhead lamp in the evening. Within weeks, she noticed something strange. Clients who had previously gone quiet began reaching out. Referrals increased. She wasn't posting more, she wasn't advertising. But she said, "It felt like I was remembered." When asked if she credited the bowl, she laughed and said, "I think I just stopped forgetting that part of the room." And that's the point. Circulation starts when you stop forgetting. When you stop overlooking a corner because it's out of the way, because it's always been that way, because you never thought it mattered. Feng Shui doesn't demand new furniture or complex formulas. It asks for awareness. And that awareness begins with asking, is this space alive, or is it a shelf for dust? Is this corner saying, welcome, or is it saying, I've been abandoned? This question matters because money doesn't just flow toward effort. It flows toward harmony. toward coherence, toward places that feel prepared to use it wisely rather than places that trap it out of fear. Buddhist philosophy complements this beautifully. In the Eightfold Path, there's a principle known as right action, not just doing, but doing in alignment with wisdom and presence. Movement without clarity creates more karma, more confusion. But movement with clarity becomes a form of liberation. The same is true in space. A fan placed in a cluttered corner just stirs chaos, but a subtle spiral or bowl in an intentional space becomes a teaching. It reflects rhythm. It echoes readiness. This is why in Buddhist temples, even the placement of a single bell or water basin is deliberate, not to impress the eye, but to tune the energy of the room toward reverence and ease. This reverence is what your wealth corner is asking for. Not grandeur, not expense, but presence. A willingness to notice, to tend, to move the energy that has been silently still for too long. If you've ever felt that your finances are stuck, not because you're lazy, but because something unseen is hesitating, look not at your bank account first, but at your home. Is there a space that feels neglected, heavy, slow? Is there a corner where you haven't looked in months? That's where circulation needs to begin. Not in your budget, in your energy field, in the architecture of your day-to-day environment. So what should you add? Start simple, a circular object, a timer, a bowl, something that moves gently or that reflects light and motion. Choose an item that feels soft in the hand, that you want to touch, not display. Place it where you will see it, near a plant, near a window, near wherever you first take your morning breath. Let it become your private signal, not to do more, but to remember that energy, like wealth, cannot be held tight. It must move, it must return, and it must be invited, not by force, but by rhythm. In closing, the corner of circulation is not about where to place your next investment. It's about where you've let your energy sit still for too long. Money is like water. It doesn't arrive because you demand it. It arrives because you've made space for it to flow, to pause, to return. The bowl doesn't overflow when it's watched. The spiral doesn't confuse when it's grounded. The wealth you're waiting for may not be late. It may simply be asking, where would you like me to land? B, the corner of storage, where stillness holds value. If the flow of wealth is like water, constantly moving, nourishing, evaporating, returning, then there must also be a vessel, a place where that movement can pause, settle, and be honored. In Feng Shui, this is not a contradiction. It is a completion, because movement without containment leads to exhaustion, and containment without movement leads to decay. The corner of storage, then, is not a passive zone. It is the quiet vault of intentionality, a space in the home where value is not chased or displayed, but remembered, where the past is not lived in, but anchored, where stillness does not block abundance, it gives it meaning. In Buddhist practice, the teachings of impermanence are not meant to erase memory. They're meant to free us from attachment to its form while preserving its essence. The letter of the law fades, but the principle remains. And in Feng Shui, that principle finds a home in the storage corner, not in clutter, not in accumulation, but in stewardship. That is the distinction most people miss. Saving is not hoarding, it is mindful care. It is the act of holding something, not to prevent loss, but to preserve gratitude. A home that has no place for savings, energetic or physical, is a home that forgets what it's already received. And a home that forgets cannot receive more, because it no longer remembers how to hold. To create this space, one does not need safes or vaults or locks. What is needed is a container, one that is intentional, beautiful in its simplicity, and dignified in its purpose. A ceramic jar, a wooden box, a cloth-wrapped envelope tied with red string. The container becomes not just a place to put things, but a symbol of what you are willing to care for. Not because it is currently valuable in monetary terms, but because it represents a thread of your own energy that has already borne fruit. This is what we call a karmic bank, not of money, but of meaning. Because in Feng Shui, as in Buddhist thought, meaning is what holds energy in place. Without meaning, money slips through fingers. With meaning Even a single coin becomes a prayer. So what should go into this container? Not your bills, not your tax documents, not your emergency fund calculations. Those have their place, but they belong in systems, not in symbols. What belongs here are your firsts. Your first paycheck, your first sale, your first handwritten receipt, the napkin on which you first drafted your business idea, the letter that reminded you why you chose to stay in the game. These are not trophies. They are touchstones. They are the fragments of effort that the world has already said yes to. And by placing them in one quiet, clear container, you are telling the universe, I remember where I began. I honor where I've been. I am still building, but not from nothing. I once visited the home of a single father in Manila. He lived modestly, a small studio above his mother's home, with simple furniture and shelves filled with books his daughter loved. When we talked about his finances, he looked tired, not from lack of work, but from the weight of feeling that no matter how much he earned, it vanished. I save, he said, but it always feels like I'm just plugging holes. I asked him if there was any corner of his home where he placed things not out of necessity, but out of respect. He shook his head. He hadn't thought about it. When I asked what he was most proud of financially, not in size, but in soul, he pulled out a folded piece of paper from his wallet. It was a letter his daughter had written at school. Thank you, Papa, for buying me new shoes, even though yours are old. He cried when he read it. I asked him to place it in a small wooden box, one he already had, but had never used. He placed it on the northeast corner of the room where the morning light touched it. Not for the world to see, I said, just for the energy of the room to remember. 3 months later, he told me he'd started setting aside a small savings jar, not large, but steady. He no longer felt panicked. I don't feel like I'm losing, he said. It's like the money listens now. This is what the corner of storage does. It reminds the home and its inhabitant that value is not only in accumulation, it is in remembering. In Buddhist practice, memory is not something you cling to. It's something you visit like a shrine. You bow to it. You touch the past lightly, then return to the present with more humility and more perspective. This is the essence of the storage corner. It's a shrine to the wealth you already proved was possible. And when the space reflects that remembering, the energy around it stabilizes. Instead of craving more, it starts attracting more, not through force, but through coherence. In terms of physical setup, this corner benefits from materials that feel earthy, grounded, and textured. Wood, clay, fabric. Avoid glass or mirrors in this zone. They are too active, too reflective. This space is not about reflection. It is about absorption. It is about creating a quiet gravitational pull, not a projection. Colors in this space can be warm neutrals, mocha, beige, light ochre, faded browns. Avoid neon, metallic or sterile white. Those are tones of urgency, and this corner is about reverence. A small lamp with a soft yellow glow can anchor the energy gently. You are creating not a display, but a signal. I keep what matters. Do not overload this space. 1 or 2 objects, a letter, a coin, a handwritten note, an envelope of receipts labeled first quarter 2024. Whatever you choose, treat it as sacred. Clean around it. Dust it weekly, not because it's fragile, but because it is worthy. Just as you would clean around an altar or brush the leaves of a favored plant, not to protect it, but to be in relationship with it. And in time, you will begin to notice a subtle shift. Decisions made in haste begin to slow. The impulse to spend from emptiness fades. The craving to have more becomes a readiness to hold better. And as that shift takes root, the chi of your home becomes more stable. You may find that money doesn't arrive in bigger waves, but in calmer ones. That income doesn't spike, but it becomes steady. That emergencies still come, but you meet them with more resilience. This is not a miracle, it's a mirror. Your outer space is reflecting your inner rhythm, and that rhythm is no longer frantic. It is held. The corner of storage, then, is where you turn to remind yourself not of what's missing, but of what has already worked. It is a place of quiet dignity, of emotional equity, of financial wisdom that doesn't shout, but remembers. And it teaches you, if you let it, that sometimes wealth isn't something to chase. It's something to keep when it finally says yes to you. See, the corner of aspiration, where vision shapes reality. Before effort comes vision. Before success, there is direction. And before abundance manifests in the material world, it takes shape in the mind. Through imagination, clarity, belief, and most of all, through willingness to hold that vision long enough for it to arrive. In Feng Shui, the aspiration corner is the part of the home that does not store, reflect, or circulate. It projects. It calls forth. It stretches into the future not with force, but with quiet magnetism. When aligned, it is the energetic mirror of intention, clear, dignified, and capable of shaping outcomes not through superstition, but through spatial coherence. You don't grow toward what you can't see. This is not just an architectural observation. It is a life truth. Without visual clarity, the mind drifts. The energy of the home becomes passive, stagnant, waiting. But the aspiration corner reminds you to live with purpose is not to run. It is to look forward with steadiness. This space becomes your altar of direction, not in the religious sense, but in the energetic one. Because without direction, all effort leaks. Without a horizon, all steps blur. This corner is where the unseen becomes visible, where internal longing is invited into form, where vague wishes are replaced by anchored, embodied goals. Not rigid demands, but symbols. Feng Shui does not command the universe to deliver. It prepares a space where the soul can aim clearly and then let go. In Buddhist teachings, right view is the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path. It is not simply a belief, it is the orientation of the heart toward what matters. It is the wisdom that precedes effort, so that action does not become panic. The aspiration corner reflects this principle physically. When you place clear visual symbols of your future here, maps, framed words, intention boards, you are not manifesting through magic. You are aligning space with view. You are choosing what the energy of your home looks at every day, even when your mind forgets. Let's speak practically. What belongs here? Objects that give shape to desire. Items that gently remind you who you are becoming. This could be a world map with marked destinations, not just of travel, but of expansion. A framed quote that resonates, not because it's popular, but because it speaks to the specific hunger of your current life. A printed photo of something you once believed was impossible, but now allow yourself to imagine. A monthly income tracker, not for shame or ego, but to remind yourself that numbers are not just data, they are movement. And where there is movement, there is opportunity. This corner should not be crammed. It is not a scrapbook. It is a telescope. Each item should point quietly but unmistakably toward a horizon you respect. The colors here should breathe: teal, light green, soft gold, muted sapphire. Avoid too many mirrors. This is not a space for doubling. It is a space for focus. A small plant that grows toward light. A compass. A blank notepad. These all say the same thing to your subconscious. I know where I am facing, and I choose to keep walking. I recall the story of a young consultant in Kuala Lumpur. Quiet, driven, thoughtful. She told me she was overwhelmed by her current job, financially secure, but emotionally draining. She dreamed of starting a creative business, but could never find the time, the courage, or the clarity to begin. I asked her not to quit her job, not to hustle harder, just to choose one corner of her room and make it hers. Not a workspace, not a shrine, just a space where she placed only one thing. A handmade vision board with a photo of her imagined brand, a quote she loved, and a sketch of a storefront. That was all. She placed a small white lamp beside it. Every morning before work, she stood there for 60 seconds, not to meditate, not to visualize, but just to look. Within 1 year, that side business became her main work. When I asked her what shifted, she said, "I stopped pretending I didn't know what I wanted." That's the power of this corner. It doesn't scream, it reminds. It doesn't fix your finances or schedule. It aligns your gaze. In a world full of noise and distraction, your home needs at least one place that holds your future quietly. with dignity. Energetically, this space should be placed where light lands gently but consistently. If near a window, let the sunlight filter through a sheer curtain. If in a darker zone, use warm, indirect lighting, nothing glaring, nothing cold. A floor lamp with a paper shade, a candle during certain hours, a backlit frame. The light here should be directional but soft. It should feel like dawn, not noon. This is where your energy begins again, not where it finishes. And yet, this space also requires discipline. Intention boards that get buried under paper. Maps that become decoration instead of conversation. Words that once inspired but now collect dust. These become stagnant. They whisper confusion instead of direction. So revisit this corner monthly. Adjust it seasonally. Don't wait for New Year's resolutions. Let this be your evolving compass. If a dream feels complete, retire it with thanks. If a new one stirs, place it with calm excitement. You are not pressuring life to deliver. You are giving yourself permission to remain in relationship with what you desire. There is a deeper Buddhist layer here as well. Aspiration, in spiritual terms, is not greed. It is devotion to becoming who you already are beneath fear. The aspiration corner, then, is not for external goals only. It is for right view about your inner capacity, for seeing your enoughness before it is proven, for believing in possibility before it is guaranteed. The items you place here are not just markers. They are mirrors of self-trust. They say, I am willing to name what I long for, and I am willing to let space reflect it back to me. So when you design this corner, do it not for others to see, but for the quietest part of you to feel. That part of you that wakes before the alarm. That part of you that doesn't need applause. That part of you that knows, even when nothing outside confirms it, that you are meant to live a life aligned with who you are, not just what you do. And if you've never created such a space before, start today. One image, one phrase, one token of what you've always wanted to say yes to. Place it with reverence. Let it face outward. Let it breathe, then walk away, not with urgency, but with presence. Because you don't need to obsess over the future. You only need to give it a place to land. D, the corner of radiance, where recognition invites abundance. When we think about wealth, the mind often rushes to numbers, to what's been saved, what's been earned, what's been lost. But in the subtler language of energy, wealth doesn't always begin with accumulation. Sometimes it begins with recognition, not of status or fame, but of worth. Worth seen, worth honored, worth offered. In Feng Shui, this quality of worth is cultivated through what we call the corner of radiance. It's the part of your home not dedicated to savings or vision or storage, but to celebration. It's where light is allowed to land on you, without apology, without hesitation. Because to receive abundance, we must learn not only how to hold it, but how to be seen by it. The principle here is deceptively simple. Energy expands in the presence of acknowledgement. That which is hidden remains undeveloped. That which is recognized grows. In Buddhist philosophy, there is a teaching that without right view, right action becomes aimless. But also without right confidence, right effort becomes weak. You must believe not only in the path, but in your ability to walk it. And belief, while deeply internal, often begins in the spaces around us. Through the reminders we place, the light we allow, the symbols we choose to let reflect who we already are. This is where the corner of radiance enters. It's the part of the home where you allow evidence of your effort to shine. Not boastfully, not for others, but for energy itself to register and affirm your movement. Because when you celebrate progress, however small, the chi around you begins to echo that tone. It begins to return more of what is already being honored. What should live in this corner? Anything that reminds you of who you've become through courage. A certificate, a framed letter, a printed review, a photo of a finished project, a token of your first breakthrough. This is not about ego, it's about frequency. Because when a space is filled only with tasks, it radiates pressure. When it is filled with proof of lived purpose, it radiates confidence. In one small studio in northern Italy, I met an artisan who made handmade journals, slowly, meticulously, with linen covers and hand-stitched spines. Her work was beautiful, but her sales were low. She had no online presence, no marketing. I visited her home and noticed her workspace was filled with tools, materials, and ideas, but no signs of completed joy. She kept her first thank you letter, sent by a customer from Canada, in a drawer, folded in half, tucked beneath receipts. "I don't want to appear proud," she said. I gently encouraged her to frame the letter, not on the main wall, not as a centerpiece, but simply in her southeastern corner, a place where she could see it, but it wouldn't scream. She chose a natural wood frame and placed it beside a soft lamp. Within 6 months, her Etsy shop had sold out 3 times. "I don't know if it was magic," she said, "but I finally stopped hiding the fact that someone loved my work." That's the shift. The corner of radiance is not about seeking attention. It's about ending self-erasure. It's about meeting the energy of prosperity with openness, not just openness to receive, but openness to be seen receiving. From a feng shui standpoint, this corner benefits from warmth. Warm light, warm textures, warm color tones. A soft gold lamp, a clay sconce, a mirror with a rosewood frame on it to catch morning light. Light is essential here, not because it brightens the object, but because it animates the energy. Shadowed success withers, lit success expands. Consider also the emotional posture of the items in this space. Are they weighted with obligation or lifted by joy? A framed business license that costs stress and regret will hold a different vibration than a photo of your first stall at a local market. Choose with care. What you place here becomes what your space remembers as truth. And don't think size dictates importance. One student of mine placed a single sticky note in her radiance corner. On it was written, "You kept going." It wasn't profound, but it was true. And that truth, when honored with sincerity, became the cornerstone of her financial shift. There is a Buddhist layer here that bears mentioning. In the teaching of mudita, sympathetic Dao, we are encouraged to rejoice in others' happiness, but often we forget that includes our own. We cheer for others, yet mute our own voices. We fear being seen as prideful. But Feng Shui reminds us that pride is not in the display, it's in the distortion. When you place something in your corner of radiance with reverence, not arrogance, you are practicing spiritual joy. You are saying, "I see what effort has yielded, and I offer that to the space so that the space can support more." In practical terms, update this corner as your story evolves. Add, subtract, replace, but never let it fall stale. It is not a shrine to the past. It is a celebration of process. If the object no longer inspires, release it. If a new milestone arrives, place it. And when doubt returns, as it often does, stand in this corner for 60 seconds. Let the space remind you of what has already been achieved, not to rest on it, but to remember your own rhythm. If you live with others, invite them to contribute. Let this be a shared space. A partner's framed award, a child's drawing of the family, a thank you note from a neighbor. Prosperity grows fastest in collective radiance. When everyone's light is welcome, no one's is threatened. One final note, don't place objects here that were gained through pain if the pain still vibrates. A bonus check from a toxic job, a trophy from a time you hated yourself, a plaque given with manipulation. These carry conflicting chi. Either cleanse them fully or choose something else. The radiance corner is not for perfection, it's for peace. And if you feel you have nothing worth placing, start smaller. A word that makes you feel proud. A photo where you're smiling for real. A piece of feedback that once made you cry. Let this corner become your personal archive of confidence. Not loud at all, but unmistakably yours. Because sometimes wealth doesn't arrive through gain. It arrives when you stop hiding, when you step gently into the light of your own journey and allow the space around you to celebrate with you. The corner of relationship, where support becomes stability. All abundance, no matter how vast or fleeting, eventually meets a question. Who are you holding it with? Because wealth that isn't rooted in relationship, whether with self, family, community, or cause, inevitably becomes either brittle or burdensome. Feng Shui teaches us that the energy of money is not just movement or containment, not just vision or recognition. It is also companionship. Wealth at its core is not a solo act. It's relational. It requires emotional grounding. And this is where the corner of relationship enters, not as a sentimental decoration, but as a foundational energy anchor. It is the part of the home where fortune learns to stay, not because you grip it, but because you are no longer alone in holding it. The principle here is simple. No abundance is sustainable without emotional roots. You can chase success. You can even hold it off for a while. But if your relationships are weak, neglected, isolated, or emotionally barren, the wealth will feel hollow. Or worse, it will vanish as quickly as it came, like water without soil. The corner of relationship is not about romance. It's about energetic support, about the spaces in your home that reflect connection, shared meaning, memory, and mutual care. When this area is aligned, your energy stabilizes. You don't just make it, you stay well within it. So what does this look like in practice? This corner should feel paired, warm, and emotionally inclusive. This is not the space for solo statements. It's not where you put your vision board or business accolades. This is where you put the reminders that you are not doing life alone. Place 2 chairs instead of 1. Hang a calendar with shared plans. Use warm relational colors, deep beige, soft mustard, mocha brown, dusty rose. Include a framed photo, not of you alone, but of someone who represents emotional support, however quiet. A friend, a child, a grandparent, a mentor, someone whose presence has softened the burden of your becoming. This space is especially powerful when it includes meaningful objects. A mug given by someone who believed in you, a handmade gift, a note of encouragement. These objects are not clutter. They are anchors. They tell your space, support lives here. And when your space reflects support, your nervous system calms. Your fears soften. You take bigger risks, not recklessly, but with the invisible net of relationship under you. I remember a widow I once met during a workshop in Chiang Mai. She had lost her husband 2 years prior and said she felt energetically adrift. Her finances were functional, but her motivation felt scattered. "I'm surviving," she said, "but it doesn't feel like it's mine anymore." When we walked through her apartment, I asked about a small glass bowl on her bookshelf. "It's just decorative," she shrugged. I asked her gently if she would consider placing her husband's wedding ring inside it. Not as an altar, not as a monument to grief, but as a reminder that she had once built something with someone, and that energy, though quiet now, was still present. She did, and within a season she began to reconnect, with neighbors, with an old community hobby, and eventually with a small social project that later received funding. "It's like I felt partnered again," she told me, "like I could hold things without dropping them." That is the essence of this corner. It is not about returning to the past. It is about refusing to carry the future alone. Even in solitude, this corner reminds you that you are part of a lineage, a circle, a field. Buddhist teachings on interdependence echo this truth. All karma ripens in relationship. No seed grows in isolation, and no fruit, financial or spiritual, is harvested without the sun of connection in the soil of shared support. If you live alone, this corner becomes even more vital. It is your relational mirror, not of who is currently beside you, but of who you energetically allow into your field. That could be ancestors. That could be a future partner you haven't met. That could be your inner child, finally invited back into the room. Place something there that reflects togetherness, even in its most subtle form. 2 stones, 2 feathers, a poem about companionship, a pair of chopsticks resting on a linen cloth. Feng Shui is not about superstition, it's about symbols. And symbols speak directly to qi, bypassing logic and entering the realm of embodied permission. And if you share your home with others, partner, friend, parent, let this be a space you co-create. Ask them what they'd like to see there. A recipe, a favorite card, a snapshot of a shared laugh. When multiple people contribute to one space, that space begins to radiate coherence. You no longer have to talk about connection. The room says it for you. Energetically, keep this area clean, but not sterile. Dust it, tend to it, but let it feel lived in. A little softness, a little movement, a little life. Avoid sharp corners, solitary items, or anything that screams achievement. This is not a trophy wall. It's a fireplace. It should glow. It should invite. If music ever plays in your home, let a speaker live here. If tea is ever brewed, let a tray rest nearby. Let this space say to everyone who enters, including yourself, you are not alone here. Your effort is not unsupported. This emotional rooting affects money more than most realize. Many people believe that the path to wealth is paved through solo effort, tight control, and personal grit. And yes, discipline matters, but so does ease, so does softness, so does the willingness to be held, whether by a partner, a friend, a belief, or the memory of those who came before. When the corner of relationship is alive, money doesn't just enter, it stays because it no longer feels like it's filling a hollow place. It feels like it belongs. If you have never honored this part of your home before, begin simply. Choose one item that symbolizes shared energy. Place it with intention. Add a note beside it, one line, one sentence, that reminds you of someone who has supported you, even silently. Sit there for a few breaths, let the space absorb the memory, then move on. You don't need to stay long, you only need to return often enough for the energy to remain warm. And if this space feels hard, if it brings up grief or loneliness or disappointment, honor that too. But don't abandon the corner, transform it. Let it be a place not just of what was lost, but of what could still be built. Place a candle there, let it flicker. Let it hold your longing with dignity. Because even longing is a form of love, and love, when tended gently, becomes light. The corner of relationship is where support becomes stability, not just in theory, but in structure. It is where energy stops spiraling and begins rooting. And once your wealth knows that you are no longer alone, it begins to behave differently. It no longer rushes in and out. It begins to take off its coat. It begins to stay a while. Section 2, subtle energetic killers, what to avoid. In every home there are objects that speak. Some whisper peace, some amplify purpose, and others, quietly and without warning, drain the energy of the entire space. Not with malice, not with noise, but with neglect, inertia, and dissonance. In Feng Shui, we understand that energy doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. One item placed without thought or left without attention can begin to shift the qi of a room from coherence to confusion. These items aren't always the obvious ones. They're not cursed or broken in the dramatic sense. They're subtle, forgotten, they linger. And over time, they become energetic killers. Not because of what they are, but because of how they behave in relation to the space around them. And especially when placed in wealth-sensitive areas of the home, these objects don't just block flow, they reverse it. Let's begin with the unseen damage caused by forgotten electronics. You know the drawer, or the corner, or the shelf where an old router, a cracked phone, a decommissioned tablet still lives. You don't use it, you don't need it, but you also haven't decided to release it. These are dead nodes of energy. They create stagnation, not because they are evil, but because they reflect indecision. In a system like Feng Shui that depends on clear directional qi, indecision is one of the most disruptive forces. The wealth corner in particular requires clarity, not perfection, not wealth itself, but readiness. And when you place an item in that space that says maybe, or someday, or I'm not sure what to do with this, you're transmitting that same energetic signal back into your finances. Maybe I'm ready. Someday I'll manage this. I'm not sure how to handle it yet. And the universe responding to your tone gives you more of the same. The energetic law here is not punitive, it's reflective. Or as Buddhist philosophy reminds us, karma doesn't punish, it mirrors. The same goes for dead plants. It's a common oversight. A plant dies on a shelf, and instead of immediately removing it, we leave it there for now. A week passes, then another. Soon it becomes part of the furniture, a silent participant in the life of the room. But in Feng Shui, a dead plant is not neutral. It is a visual metaphor for forgotten vitality. It speaks directly to the space. Life once existed here, but it was not sustained. When this metaphor is placed in a zone tied to prosperity, whether it's the wealth corner, the doorway, or an active yang area, it doesn't just symbolize neglect, it activates it. That neglect becomes an echo, one that subtly infiltrates the way you think about savings, income, opportunity. You stop following up on leads. You forget to reply to the email that could have led to more work. You leave money on the table, and you don't quite know why, but the reason is present. Sitting on a shelf, in a dried pot, asking to be released. Old debt paperwork functions similarly, though in a more psychological way. In many households, these documents live in the out-of-sight, out-of-mind category. But their presence, especially if placed unconsciously in a financial hotspot of the home, becomes a spiritual weight. These are not receipts. These are unresolved contracts, karma unclosed. And when they sit unaddressed under a stack of books or inside an aging folder, they cast a quiet spell on the room. They remind the energy something here is still unpaid, something is still tethered to the past. And even if you've paid the debt already, if the paperwork still carries the emotional frequency of fear, shame, or delay, it can reinforce a loop where money arrives not with grace but with guilt, where every deposit feels fragile, and where wealth, instead of feeling safe, begins to feel conditional. Clutter too falls into this category, but not all clutter is created equal. Some clutter is transitional, the pile you're sorting through, the bag meant for donation. This kind of clutter, when managed quickly, doesn't harm chi. It reflects process. But forgotten clutter, the boxes from 3 moves ago, the files you haven't opened in a decade, the broken object you meant to fix when you have time, these items radiate confusion. And confusion is one of the fastest ways to disrupt prosperity, because wealth doesn't grow in confusion. It grows in coherence, in a field where energy knows where to go and why. When your space is filled with mixed messages, your money will be too. This is not about minimalism. Feng Shui is not sterile. It does not demand emptiness. It demands resonance. Everything in your space should either contribute to your energy or, at the very least, not contradict it. When you walk past your wealth corner or any space tied to your goals, you should feel alignment, not avoidance, ease, not ambiguity. And if you don't feel that, the invitation is not to remodel, it's to notice, to ask quietly, what here feels forgotten? What here feels unresolved? And perhaps more importantly, what part of me have I allowed to be symbolized by this item? Because every item you keep is a metaphor. If your wealth corner feels abandoned, what part of your financial life have you been ignoring? If your mirror reflects a trash bin, what part of you feels like a repository for everyone else's waste? If your corner is vibrant, clear, and gently animated by beauty, what internal part of you has remembered its value? There is a Buddhist story about a monk who kept sweeping the temple courtyard every morning, long after the ground was already spotless. One day, a visiting student asked him, "Why do you sweep if it's already clean?" The monk replied, "I'm not sweeping dirt, I'm sweeping the mind." This is what we do when we tend to these corners. We are not cleaning for aesthetics, we are clearing for clarity. We are shaping the conditions for chi to behave as if we are ready, because we are. So here is the action, not as a chore, but as a gesture. Choose one wealth-sensitive space in your home. Spend 10 minutes, not organizing it, not fixing it, but looking, really looking. Ask what each item is saying. Does it still spoil truth? Does it still support who you are becoming? If not, thank it and let it go. Not to punish the past, but to protect the future. Because in the end, subtle energetic killers don't destroy with force. They erode with familiarity. They survive in places we stop seeing. And the cure is not overhaul. The cure is attention. Quiet, loving, firm attention. That's what space responds to. That's what karma responds to. And that's what abundance too waits for. Not perfection, just readiness. Final reptile. So perhaps now, after all this reflection, not just on money or space, but on the quiet ways our homes speak back to us, you see a little more clearly. You don't have to rebuild your entire house. You don't need a new floor plan, a new city, a new life, you simply need to refine how your home listens to you and how you listen to it. Because a home, like a person, isn't static. It responds, it evolves, it holds the story of who you have been and quietly waits to carry the story of who you might yet become. And sometimes that next chapter doesn't begin with a big decision. It begins with one small corner, one shelf that gets cleared, one object that gets blessed, one space that no longer holds what you've outgrown. That one shift doesn't fix everything, but it signals something. It tells the space and your energy that you're ready for momentum. Not magic, not a miracle, just movement, just change, just an invitation for your fortune to come home. So let this be the week. Choose one corner. Don't overthink it, don't rush it. Just choose and make it true. Whether it's your circulation space, your relationship zone, your quiet altar of vision, or the subtle spot where you've kept what no longer supports you. Touch it with care, adjust it with dignity, and walk away knowing you've started something. Quietly, yes, but powerfully. If this video stirred something in you, if it gave you a new way to look at the places you live in or the life you're building, I invite you to share it with someone else who might be rebuilding too. I'd love to hear in the comments what corner you'll begin with or what you're learning to release. And if you haven't already, I warmly invite you to subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. We're nearly at 1,000 followers, and your presence helps bring these teachings into more homes and hearts than I could ever reach alone. So thank you for your time, your attention, and your energy. And remember, the mirror isn't the problem. The direction is. Until next time, may your space reflect your truest self, and may your next corner lead you forward gently.